Hello. It's the top of the hour, so we can get going. Um, Thank you for people who have joined. My name is Stephen Cohn. I'm the CEO of ProductPlan, and my background is that I'm a four-time founder. And I am super excited to be joined by Jeff and Josh today. A little window into, I want to tell you who they are. If you don't already know, you should. But if you don't, I'm gonna give them a little background on them. I'm a bit of a fanboy of both of them, which is definitely a window into how nerdy I am. But like, I think they're just awesome. I first met Jeff in I think 2009. I was in my second startup, and I read his book, co-authored by the two of them, Lean UX, right? Co-authored, yeah. And I was like, this is awesome. This is definitely the way I should be thinking about it. I also read Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup. And so I went to South by South. I found out that Jeff was speaking at South by Southwest in Austin. I booked a ticket. I went to his conference. I waited until he got off of stage, and I'm such a fanboy that I literally I badgered him and I said, "Look, I'm starting a company. We really need your help. I need you as an advisor." And I literally wouldn't take no for an answer. And that was that stalking weird experience kicked off the relationship with Jeff. And I've had a long relationship and friendship and partnership. He's been working with me in all the startups. And I love his principles, his way of thinking. We really have a mind meld. And then I got introduced to his partner, Josh, who's been partners for, Josh Seiden has been partners with him for a long time, co-wrote a whole bunch of books, not only Lean UX, Sense and Respond. And then Josh also solo wrote a great book that let me tell you how impactful this book has been, Outcomes Over Outputs. And it's a great book for product people and for product teams. I love it so much that when I first join any company or start a company or anything like that, I make everyone on the team read the book, and then we talk about the principles of the book, and then we incorporate the principles. So like, it's just a great business book for everyone to read. So I'm a huge fan of the way they think, and they put out so much content that you can read. Just really smart way of thinking. So I'm excited to have them there. Did I miss any background?
No, that's pretty thorough.
The nicest intro I've had in a long time, Stephen. So
yeah.
Thank you.
As I said, I'm a fanboy. I'm a huge believer, and I put my time and my money where my mouth is. So I saw something on LinkedIn that this new kind of concept. I was like, wow, this is really interesting. The concept is prompting for outcomes. And so, as CEO of ProductPlan, I've spent a ton of time interacting with product teams, from the senior execs, to the individual contributors all the way through. And the clear, overwhelming, consistent theme is this is like a crazy time right now with AI. Timelines are being compressed. People are expected to do more and more. And there's a lot of like experimentation, but also, if we're candid, a lot of fear, a lot of like, is this going to replace me? Is this like, how do I use this? But I think, product people in general are very curious in general. They're very experimental in general. Product people, that's just kind of the way you think when you get into product. And so, so I think everyone I talk to is embracing it at some level. But I think if we're candid, few would say they've really cracked the code on AI and how to use AI and are like, I'm automated everything my life. I think people are mostly using it for like prompt-based, like, turn this into a PRD, or does this email clean up the grammar on my email, right? And so then I saw your concept on prompting for outcomes from a product perspective. I just thought it was super interesting. So I really wanted to take the time and let you guys explain what prompting for outcomes is, how it works, what's the kind of mind shift difference that teams have to get, and what's the benefit? What's the there?
Yeah. So let me set it up. And then I'll hand over to Josh, who's going to take you through our case study, because we've got a case study where we actually put this into use and he can share with you. But I'll set up the foundational concept and then we'll share our screen, and then Josh can kind of drive the story of this conversation. So all of us, including me and Josh, I'm sure all of you, as we've been learning how to use these new AI tools over the last few years, we sit down and we tell it, I would say overwhelmingly, if not 100% of the time, we tell ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever you're using to make something for us, right? Write this email for me. Create this presentation for me. Work with me on this sales deck. Help me conceive of a training module, whatever it is, right? We're always coming at it and we're saying, help me produce a thing, right? And what's amazing is it will never say no. It will always make the thing. It will never complain. It will never get tired. And if you don't like the thing that it made for you, it'll do it again.
It'll also compliment you. That's such
Oh
a
yeah,
good idea.
brilliant you are, of course. Well done there. Great idea, Jeff. Let's go make that thing, right?
Yeah.
And it'll just keep making it until you're happy with it, in the sense. And the speed with which it can produce whatever it is that this output that you're creating, and the perceived quality, right? Certainly the polish that it comes out with is compelling, right? It's like, wow, this looks amazing, right? And it only took me 7 minutes to make it, 5 minutes to make it, and 2 prompts, and that type of thing. Now, that's just you and me and Josh in our personal use cases. When you expand that out to an organization or a company, all of a sudden you've got a full staff inside whatever size company you're in, doing all of this and producing all of this output, deliverables, documents, emails, decks, presentations, whatever it is, and features, products, services, code, etc. as well. It's always producing stuff. And a lot of the value proposition that you're hearing from the AI companies and from leaders of organizations sort of top down is, oh my God, we can 10x our productivity. They're using the wrong word there. What they're doing, the right word is production, right? We can 10x our production, right? It doesn't mean that we're 10xing our value to the market, that we're producing something that anybody wants, that anybody finds any value in, that changes something meaningful for the consumer of that output. And so Josh and I, as you mentioned at the beginning, Josh wrote this great book called Outcomes Over Output. It's kind of the rallying cry of modern product management as well. This idea that output is the stuff that we make, and outcomes is the behavior change that we see in the people that consume the output that we create, right? And then based on that behavior change, we can then determine whether we've actually delivered something valuable. So based on that concept, we thought, well, what if we actually didn't prompt AI to the AI tools that we use to do our work to create an output, but instead we prompted it for an outcome, right? Don't make me a thing, but help me achieve this behavior change in the world, in our audience, in our target audience, in our market, with our customers and with our consumers, right? And that's kind of the premise of this conversation. Like, what changes when you actually prompt AI for an outcome, and how does that change the conversation and ultimately the outputs that you create and the process for deciding how to continue and when to continue with AI moving forward? So foundationally, that's the premise of this conversation. But instead of speaking about it in the abstract, we actually tried this and put it to use. And so what I'd like to do is hand over to Josh, and I'll share the screen that we have. And he's going to tell you a story about how we put this into practice with something that we did and what we learned from it. And then we're happy to take your questions and discussion about these ideas as we move forward. Okay. All right, Josh, I'll share my screen. It's all you.
Great. Thank you for that setup, guys. Nice to be here with you all. I want to show you, we'll start when the screen share starts. The first thing you're going to see is just a little bit of statistics, some stats to back up what Jeff was talking about, right? If you just sort of use GitHub as the yardstick here, as a measure of like how much stuff we're making now, and by stuff, right? If it's GitHub, this stuff is software. We're seeing this unbelievable growth in GitHub commits, right? We went from what do we got here? Like a 14x growth year over year. We're going from 1 billion commits in 2025 to like 250 million per week in 2026. So the numbers are bearing out this story, right? It's easier than ever to make stuff. And I had that experience personally myself as I started to sort of play with the AI tools. I started making stuff, which was really fun. It was really fun to be unlocked. And I built my, I built my, I'm a photographer, as a hobbyist photographer. I built a portfolio site. I built a gallery guide for New York City galleries. I built a geography learning game. You know, I'm not a person who uses GitHub. I'm a product guy and a designer, but all of a sudden I'm like every weekend pushing code to GitHub. And then I had this moment of where I just had to laugh at myself. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm the guy who wrote outcomes over output. And I've just like, all I'm doing is outputting stuff, you know? And I started to think about like, well, okay, if we were to flip this logic, if we were to say, if we were to start our process with kind of being outcome centric, what might that look like? And so the first question was really like, for me, why don't teams work in an outcome centric way? And when you, the sort of two big objections that I've seen in my consulting work is first that most organizations don't do what Stephen described doing at the top of this call. Stephen said he shows up at a new company, he buys copies of the books, they read them, they talk about them, they think about how do we start thinking about outcome centric ways of working. Instead, most companies are locked into production equals productivity. So output centric thinking, that's the first challenge to overcome. But then when companies do start kind of they buy the idea of outcomes. Well, what makes working in an outcome centric way hard? One of the big problems is that in order to tell if you've created an outcome, you have to be able to measure what people are doing with your product or service. And so for most teams, certainly in legacy organizations, that data is really hard to come by. And so what I wanted to do was to try to kind of sketch a process that would address this way of working, that would address this kind of turn people towards an outcome-centric way of thinking and try to solve the data problem. And so I loaded a bunch of material into, in this case, I used Notebook LM. And I told Notebook LM, I want to consider an outcome-centric way of working. And I gave Notebook LM our shorthand definition of what an outcome is. An outcome, one of the challenges with outcomes is that people use that word to mean many different things. And so they use it to mean results, they use it to mean targets, they use it to mean goals. And fine, you can use it any way you want, but we have found that it's most helpful when you use it in a really strict way. And so what we say is an outcome is a measurable change in human behavior that creates value. And you can say that in a simpler way by just asking these three questions. Who does what by how much? Who is the human? Does what is the behavior change? And by how much is the measure?
Can I jump in there for a second, Josh? I don't want to interrupt your flow, but that's when I talk about how I bring the principles in your book into my companies and teams when I join them, like that shift in thinking is, I think, the big unlock for a lot of the teams, which is you as an individual contributor can't or team can't necessarily impact like our revenue growth, right? Like or our churn or our whatever metric, like financial
Exactly.
metric. What you can do is you can get more users using our ideas feature, right? Or more users adding new assets to the roadmap or like new updates to the roadmaps, right? Like you can change that behavior. And I, as a business person, I'm hoping to connect that change in behavior to the business metric that I want to change, right? And that feels more controllable, right? As a product team, that I can change that behavior, that human behavior, that user behavior feels like a
Exactly.
controllable thing. Whereas grow revenue by 25%, like that, how am I going to do that? I'm not in sales. I'm not in marketing, so has been a big unlock. That kind of shift a little bit. And the way you phrase it there has been a big unlock with the teams I've been working with.
You should be the CEO of more companies, Steve.
Well, I've been the CEO of 4. I mean,
It's a good start.
I'm
It's a good
trying.
start. Get up to 40 or so. That'd be good.
Yeah. So this is the idea, right? It's to make the target really concrete. A user, a person, a specific role who does what, to be really specific and concrete about that, and then to make it measurable and to keep that within the scope of control of the team. So this team is responsible for this feature. We set a usage target, whatever it is. And then as an organization, we have a theory about how that ladders up to growth or retention or revenue or whatever that high level thing is, which is critically important, but is a sum of many outcomes, right? So I put this all into Notebook LM, and Notebook LM thought it was a great idea. What a fantastic concept, Josh. And so I was super happy to hear that it liked the idea. Jeff, let's go to the next panel. And
There's
so
something very psychological about whoever figured out that if you start every answer with a compliment, like you're gonna get great usage. Like whoever was the person who was like, guys, told the engineers like just everything, no matter what they say, everything start with like a compliment. And I'm sure there's some engineers who are like, but what if it's a stupid idea? Just start with a compliment anyways.
Yeah.
I honestly believe one of the most important things you can put in your system prompt is just a prohibition against compliments. Like do not start by complimenting my ideas. I've got that written into my Claude.md file. Anyway, so I worked for a little while, and this is kind of the first framework. So this is a very, very simple framework for prompting. I don't think either of us want to pretend that this is a super sophisticated and super complete way of thinking about this, but this outlines the big steps that we've come to think are important. And so what are the big steps here if you look at this process? Step one is what's the outcome we're trying to generate? So instead of starting with make me a thing, we're going to start with a specific outcome in mind. And so we decided, but I'll tell you the story of our case study as we go here. So we decided to test this out. Jeff and I host a monthly webinar series. We decided to test this out on a webinar. And so the prompt was, our webinar series generates 200 signups typically. Usually about half of that audience shows up. We'd like to make a meaningful improvement in the registration numbers. I'd like to see 300 people register for this one. So there's the outcome. Who does what by how much? Who is, audience members? What do they do? Does what is register for the webinar. By how much? 50% growth to 300. Okay. Who does what by how much? You can see there's kind of another potential outcome for the future, right? Which is that of the people who sign up, only 50% show up. So in the future, we might want to work on that outcome. But for this one, it was just about growing registrations. Okay. The next thing then is to say, okay, given that that's my outcome, what are the best outputs? What's the best thing to make to drive that outcome? And I went back and forth with Claude. I was using Claude for this, suggested a bunch of things. And we ended up coming up with a sort of we had been just sharing the link to the Zoom page to sign up for the webinar. And it suggested creating a landing page, and I liked that idea. So we ended up creating a landing page, a standalone landing page that we drove traffic to. And that in turn drove people to the Zoom registration page. That was sort of counterintuitive. You'd think that driving people straight to the reg page would be more effective, but it turns out this worked really well. And then it also suggested a series of promotional outputs, right? Jeff and I both write Substack newsletters. We both post regularly on LinkedIn. And so it suggested, right, a kind of a campaign of Substack posts and email newsletters. So you prompt, you tell it what the outcome is. You kind of iterate on what your output, you have a hypothesis about what the output should be. And then the next piece of this is measurement. Remember I said that one of the big obstacles for teams is they don't have the data to measure the outcomes. And so I really wanted to know, I really wanted to ensure that we're building the measurement framework into everything we're doing, right? So tell me about the measurement framework that you're creating. And we created a very specific measurement framework for this. Each newsletter had its own tag, et cetera, et cetera. So we could track the performance with Google Analytics, as well as the analytics, the native analytics on the other platforms. The next piece then is to monitor and iterate, right? It wasn't enough that we designed and shipped our campaign. You're monitoring the progress of your work as you go. And the work is only done when you've achieved the results. So at some point, a couple of weeks before the webinar, we're watching the numbers. We have 230 registrations, which is, by the way, great, right? That's already higher than our than normal, but it's not what our target is. And so we started to look at what tactical changes might we make to drive that number. And we did an analysis of the data, and we saw that that certain tactics were working better than other tactics. In particular, the email campaign was outperforming the LinkedIn campaigns. And so we added extra emails to the campaign to drive to our numbers. And then once we were done, the last step here is to analyze what worked and what didn't work, so that we can sort of iterate through this campaign, or learn and feed those learnings into the future initiatives. Okay, so this is kind of the idea, right? It's a pretty basic illustration. It's a pretty basic case study, but here's the idea, right? You start with the outcome. You create a hypothesis about what you need to make in order to achieve that outcome. When you put it in motion, you put it in motion with a built-in measurement framework, and then you watch the measures and you adjust based on what you're learning. Remember, we said making output is easier than ever. So as the numbers came in, right, being able to adjust the output, that's the easy part, right? And then gather it all up and get ready to do it again. that is the case study that we wanted to share with you. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Steven, because I love to talk about this.
Yeah. So one of the things that, I mean, why I am a fanboy of the two of you and such a is because I think I read a lot of what you write, and you have a very clear way of explaining how, like in a very usable way, like how I can do what you're doing, right? Because like ultimately, it's you watch something, you're like, that sounds cool, but like, where do I even get going, right? That becomes entertainment, but not practical, right?
Yeah.
And the practicality of the way you guys explain in your books or your newsletters or your presentations, how you actually go about executing and implementing, I think is just a gift and really terrific. So that's really the question. Let's start with, okay, let's say we're in the audience or I'm watching this on whatever. I'm like, okay, I buy this. It's a bit of a mindset shift. Um, let me experiment with this. Okay, I want to try this with one of my teams with the next sprint or something that we're doing, right? How do we get started? How do you walk me through? Like, you're a product leader for a pod or a squad or whatever you want to call it. Like, how do you get people excited about this? How do you like start this process? How would you approach it?
I'm happy to start with a take on this. So, more than likely, the team that you're working with has been given something to build. That's usually how things work, even today. Or you've decided on a thing that your team is now going to build and is going to work on. And that's why most of this AI based work starts with a prompt for an output. But if you pause for a second, right, and even if you've got a very defined thing that your team is making, if you pause for a second and you have a conversation with the team, you say, look, okay, folks, we're going to build this thing because they told us to, they're expecting it, it's on the roadmap, the sales guys are selling it, whatever it is. Um, when we ship this thing and it does great, what will people be doing differently? Right? So right there, right? We're asking the who does what by how much question, right? It's a little bit more subtle, but as people start to give you answers to what will people be doing differently, you can start to tease out those three components, right? People is the who, right? Does what? Okay, what do we expect them to do once we ship this thing? And how is that different from today? Well, they'll do it 50% more than today or 30% less than today, right? Like we're shipping, I don't know, we're shipping a new search feature, whatever it is, right? Terrific. What do we expect people to do differently once the search feature rolls out? Well, we expect them to find what they're looking for in fewer attempts. Okay, great. Right? Who, right? Current users does what? Finds what they're looking for by how much? In 50% fewer attempts, right? Something along those lines. So what you've done already, like just in a very, very short conversation, this is not shouldn't be a lengthy conversation if the team that you're working with is familiar enough with the product, the workflow, and the target audience. And it's a big assumption, to be fair. Um, right away, in a very short conversation, you've moved the team from we're building a thing to we're changing this customer behavior. And so at the very least, you can then start to use this framework, right, to start to think through how you might implement the search feature or whatever it is that you're working on in a way that drives that specific behavior that we're looking for, that will tell us that this was worth doing. This was work that was worth doing. It was output that was worth creating, right? Just because it's easy to create doesn't mean that it's valuable. To me, that's how I would start the conversation with the team.
Josh, anything to
I mean, that's it, right? That's the starting point. That's prompt number one. And then prompt number two, we can talk about the challenge of getting data into the solution. But I think those are the two big conversations, right? It's let's just have this simple conversation, and hey, can we just start to agree that going forward, we're going to put usage measuring data we're gonna build a telemetry capability into each feature. That's harder. I mean, there's legitimate infrastructure concerns here. There's regulatory concerns. I get all of that, but in many cases, it's trivially easy. And so I would say, like, those are the two things you want to do.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add, and I want to make it clear that, like, Josh and I work a lot with large multinational organizations, and we understand how work gets done there, like where it comes from. It comes in this direction, right? From top to bottom, generally speaking, and pushing against that is difficult. So we're not suggesting that you put yourself in a career limiting situation, right? What we're suggesting is that you simply have this conversation and that you have it as part of the ongoing conversation. So the idea here is not to say, well, why should we build this? You're not challenging the plan, especially if you're not in a position to challenge the plan or the mandate, right? You're simply adding the outcome into the conversation. That's it, right? So just to be super clear, right? I'm not suggesting that you push back hard on your VPs and your stakeholders and your clients if you're not in that position. But what will people be doing differently once we ship this? Not if we ship this, right? Once we ship this, what do we expect people to be doing differently? Brings the outcome into the conversation, and that's a win, right? Log that as a win if you can keep that as part of the thread going forward.
Awesome. Fill up the Q&A questions. We're going to get to audience Q&A. I'm going to ask one last one to give you guys some time to ask Q&A. I mean, almost all the time, whenever I interact with people who listen to these things, I hear this all the time. Yeah, that's cool, but my company's different. It won't work for my company, right? Yeah, everyone's company is different, right? And at the end of the day, we're all like basically solving the same exact problems. So, are there limits to where this would work? I mean, let me be clear. Let me be more clear. I'm sure this is not marital advice, right? Like, don't try this with your spouse, right? But in the context of what we're talking about here, what are the limits? Are there boundaries, right?
Yeah.
That the natural boundaries of like, where this approach is better, or frankly, is it really work? Does it work for services? Does it work for
Yeah. So why? So to answer that question, just kind of quickly go back to what's the point of the whole thing? Like, who cares? Outputs, outcomes. Is one better than the other? No, right? It's not that one is better than the other. The idea is that outcomes are really, really valuable when we're not sure that our solution is going to work, right? If we know that the thing we're going to build is going to work, don't mess around with all these outcome stuff. Like, just build it and get on with your day, right? So if you have high certainty that this thing is going to work, right, just build it, right? We need a login screen, username and password. Like, okay, we understand that, right? Outcomes become really valuable when we're really not sure if the thing we're building is the best solution to the problem, right? This is the thing we're going to make. Is it going to work? And when you really start to look at that dynamic, right, what you're really saying is outcomes are great when you have uncertainty. And there's almost always uncertainty certainly in software, right? Well, I've got this requirement. Boss says build this feature. Right? Okay, we could build a feature. We could build it in this way or this way or this way or this way. There's a million possible ways we could build the feature. We could build it with a huge scope. We could build it with a minimal scope. What's the best way? And so the limits are like, really only use this where you're in situations where you're facing uncertainty, and ground yourself in what are we trying to get the user to do? What's the most valuable thing that the user is trying to do for themselves, or that we want the user to do, and find the intersection of those things. And that's when you use it. So that's what the limit is from my point of view.
Okay, Mark, Brosnan had a great question. What do you find to be the biggest cause of resistance to teams taking a shared understanding to define outcomes? So taking the approach and to developing a shared understanding. What's the biggest cause of resistance, and how do you overcome that resistance?
Yeah, I think that there's a variety of this. I think honestly, to some extent, there is a lack of knowledge, right? So it's like what should we measure? We don't actually know. Maybe we have a good guess. I'm gonna guess that teams have a good guess, but maybe they've never been asked before. Maybe they are a few significant steps away from the end user experience, right? And so they're like, well, what should we measure? I mean, the customer doesn't even see what we do ever, and really, it only affects the user experience 3 or 4 steps down the line. I think that's a lot of pushback as well. I also think that it adds a level of uncertainty to the work that folks are not, and not just leadership for that matter, but that folks are just uncomfortable with. I think there's something very comforting, maybe that's the right word, for folks to come in and say, what am I working on today? Today I'm building the sign-in page. Okay, great. I'm working on the sign-in page. Rather than, should I work on the sign-in page? Should I build a sign-in page? Right? I think there's a little bit of discomfort there, especially for folks who work in organizations that reward and incentivize output, the production of output. So I think that there's a lot of pushback there. So a lot of like, I don't know what we should measure. And honestly, I think if you give people the opportunity to think about it, I think they'll get there pretty quickly. Maybe they've never been given the opportunity to think about it. Um, and if you don't know, right, then bring in a data scientist, a business analyst, somebody who knows the data, who knows the numbers, and can walk you through and to say when people come from these sources and they do this, then they tend to do this, and then they buy, and then we keep them for this much time, and the LTV on them is X or Y or Z or whatever it is, right? Somebody who knows those funnels and those workflows, bring them into your meeting so they can sketch that out for you, and you can get a real sense of, okay, what can we, to your point earlier, Stephen, what can we meaningfully impact, right? So LTV, that's like, we're the authentication team. That's not us, right?
Right.
But time to first purchase, okay, we can have an impact on that potentially, right? And so I think those conversations, if they don't happen naturally, maybe they need to be facilitated, and maybe they need to be better informed in that sense. So those are a couple things that come to mind as objections.
Casey Swain had a add-on question that tied to something that you just touched on. How do you advocate for outcomes when most of the goals are output focused? Example, your team's OKRs are outputs, not outcomes.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a couple of ways that you can do that. You can, the thing that I said before is like, there's always uncertainty when you've been asked to build feature X or create marketing campaign Y, right? And you're measured on whether whether you made that thing. Okay. Our friend Jeff Patton has this nice formulation, which is our goal should always be to create the maximum outcome with the smallest amount of output. Right? So what's the smallest thing we can deliver to generate a valuable result? And look, every team is motivated to keep scope small. So one thing you can do is you can say, well, look, we have to build this thing and we have to deliver it in 6 months. And we're going to be battling for the next 6 months. We're going to be having this like horse trading about scope. Right? And we've all seen those spreadsheets, right? Where it's like, there's a feature and then everybody scores the feature. And then you sort of do the math and you're like, well, this feature scored a 6. Well, like, come on. So what do we think is going to be if we use instead this idea of an outcome as a filter? Well, okay, what's the feature that's going to most help us create this outcome? And so I think it can be used as you can approach that kind of OKR in that way, right?
One thing that's always baffled me, but like I hear it all the time from product teams. Some product teams are like blocked from talking to customers
Mhm.
or measuring, like, telemetry, like adding like measurement and stuff like that into the product. What do you do in those scenarios if you're a product leader but you want to implement these practices?
I just want to say before I give you a real answer is that I can't believe that that still happens. I know it happens.
Yeah,
I just cannot believe
same
that
way.
in 2026 we
I,
don't have metrics.
I
Is
hear it.
we don't measure it is an answer.
I
Like that's
hear it all the time, and it's like, are
it's
you? It's
unacceptable.
it's free. Like, it's free. Like, I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
or cheap. I mean, it's just, yeah,
If I was the CEO of a company, the unacceptable behavior.
yeah,
Look, here's the real answer because I know we're running tight on time a little bit. The real answer is, look, if you don't have the data, like the actual quantitative data, then go get qualitative data. Go get signal from somewhere, right? So if you literally don't have the feature instrumented, then go talk to 10 customers and walk them through a prototype or a demo or a live feature and see what they do and collect that. That will give you data. That will give you insight. It'll give you a sense, a tiny bit of quantitative data, how many of the 10 could complete the task, how long it took them to complete the task. But it'll give you a lot of qualitative data as well about whether you're solving a real problem, whether there's a real need here, and whether your solution actually meets that need. So that's a fantastic, I mean, you should always be doing that anyway, but especially if you don't have the quantitative data, don't let that stop you. Go get some of that qualitative data. It's easy, it's cheap, it's fast, and you can really learn something quickly that will inform the next thing that you feed into the production machine.
yeah. Um, any last questions? I think the Q&A chat. What's the one last piece of? Do you have like one piece of advice that like comes up in all of your speaking engagements at the end of, like, I assume most of the people who come here, you speak or read your content, are um, struggling with exactly kind of what Casey and others are Mark are asking us, like, how do I take this into this and be a change agent? But like, are there any other kind of like core questions or principles that you always, best piece of advice, like, if start here, and like, how do you make it happen?
Uh, I had this amazing conversation with a CEO of a small bank, and I had been talking to his operations people who were really bought into the idea of outcomes, and they had kind of created this conversation in the company about using outcomes. And so I was writing a case study, and so I was interviewing all these people in the company, and I interviewed the CEO, and I asked him, I was like, I, I said, do you set the outcomes that the business should be going after? And he just laughed at me, and he said, I have people for that. And I said to him, I said, well, what do you do? And he said, well, whenever somebody comes to me asking for money, I just ask them, what's the outcome? And then I sit back and I listen. And so I think, like for me, there were a couple of things that I thought were really really kind of brilliant about that. But one is like just having that conversation. Just having, if you change nothing in your process, just having that conversation with people is hugely valuable, right? It helps you orient to a customer centric strategic north, right? And and then other things, good things follow from there. Process changes, and we get the data, and we start having discipline, blah blah blah. But like just having that conversation, that's for me. That would be the the that would be my pep talk for the audience.
I mean, I would, as a leader, who has implemented this in several companies and very happy with how it's shaped culture. Um, I think one of the big things is not only educating the teams on what it is, but aligning compensation bonus structures to achieving those measurable behavioral outcomes. I thought Casey actually hit the nail on the head. Sometimes you set the wrong goals our output focus goals, and they're like, hey, we achieved that, right? And but the numbers haven't changed, right? So I did my job, right? And but thinking about how trying to set team goals and align cross-functional team goals. So product design, customer success all have the same team goals that are measurable behavior change, right? And so, in our case, we just released a big release around the ideas features in our product, and we're doing a whole lot of innovation there, and we really want to try to drive growth. And our belief is that that's a very sticky product experience, and we think the new designs are great. And so the product design and customer success team all have Q3 goals on product adoption for those features, right? And that's a tangible thing that they can focus on. Customer success is promoting webinars on it. They're doing in-app notifications. We're doing marketing, doing email sequences, other things about these new features that we're going to keep driving behavior change towards. And so it's not just talk, it's literally aligning incentives, financial incentives towards those same behavior changes as well.
Yeah, and look, and reduces the finger pointing, right? It's like, well, I wrote the code.
Right.
Code works as
Right.
designed. It's the design that's crap, right? Like
Yeah.
there's none of that, right?
Yeah.
Like you could write great code, right? But if the design isn't working, or you can do a great design, if the design doesn't get people to the great code, it doesn't matter. So that's great.
That's the other fundamental mindset shift. I want to build on that point, that when I bring this into organizations, I'm like, look, you can have a massive impact with 2 lines of code, and you could have absolutely no impact whatsoever with 5,000 lines of code. Your job is not to write code. Your job is not to create a prototype. Your job is not to write a feature spec. Collectively, your job is to change as a group, to change this behavioral outcome. Figure out how to change this behavioral outcome as a group, and you're all going to get your bonuses or not get your bonuses as a group by hitting this behavioral change, right? Together, work together collaboratively. You can have the most brilliant designs, but you got to work collaboratively with the engineers to be able to implement that. And yes, it's a little unfair because they have to do their jobs, I have to do my jobs, but we're in this together as a team. And kind of that mindset shift for cross-functional teams, I've found to be the most impactful.
It's really powerful. It's great.
I'd like to work for you, Stephen.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we're at time, right? It was supposed to be at 1:45. Were we going to the top of the hour or 1:45? We had time.
I think it was still 45
originally. Okay, so we're 3 minutes over. Thank you, guys. You're awesome. If you want to read more, go to senseandrespond.co.
Yeah, that's CO, exactly.
Yeah,
that's CO. We couldn't afford the M.
Jeff is in Spain right now, so instead of saying yes, he said C.
It's instinctive.
Senseandrespond.co. Awesome content. Sign up for their newsletters. Attend one of their webinars so they hit their 300 goal.
Exactly.
And thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks for having us,
guys.
Yeah.
Yep.